Okay guys, so today we're just going to finish off looking at the non-specific immune system by looking briefly at cytokines and how inflammation works. And then we're going to start looking at the lymph system, so how the lymph system works and how that links in to B and T cells in the specific or adaptive immune system. So we touched on cytokines briefly when we were looking at signalling. So they are the main protein messengers of the immune system. So they send messages between various immune cells, helping them coordinate to fight infections. And they are mostly produced by T cells. They can be produced by other cells, but they are mostly made by T cells. We'll look at T cells briefly later on in this session. And they act on a variety of cells. So they're involved in communication between all the parts of the immune system. So that's all there is to really say about those, but just be aware that in many of the things we look at in immune responses, cytokines will crop up. So when you hear them, just think messengers. Now on to inflammation. So inflammation is a non-specific response, and it basically involves ensuring that when an infection happens, that white blood cells can quickly get to an area. So I've said there, it happens in response to pathogens, and I've put especially breaches in the skin. So inflammation is commonly associated with when your skin may have been breached, and it's a sort of redness or swelling that happens afterwards. It's usually painful to touch, and that's caused because after the initial breach of the skin and the infection by the pathogens, mast cells that we looked at previously release their histamine. And when they release their histamine, that makes the blood vessels in the area dilate, and that allows white blood cells to move to that area. So that might be macrophages or it may be neutrophils, but they basically fight the infection by engulfing them or releasing chemicals to slow down the pathogens. Okay. So yeah, I've got some information about that there. And yeah, also platelets will quickly move to the area of infection too, to clog it up and to stop the bleeding being open, which stops further infection happening. And the inflammation, so the actual red swelling of the area caused by the blood vessels dilating, that will last a while until both the infection is gone and until the wound is healed properly. So inflammation tends to only be for very, very minor infections. It tends to really be before an infection actually happens. It's just to prevent an infection taking hold, really. So just to sum up what inflammation is, when there's an infection caused, possibly by a breach in the skin, blood vessels will dilate in response to histamine being released from mast cells, and then the blood vessels dilate, allowing white blood cells to move to the area of the infection and fight it off. So that, along with what we looked at earlier in the week, really covers everything to do with the non-specific immune system. So inflammation, mast cells, phagocytes, all that stuff covers the non-specific immune system. And next session we'll move on to look in detail about the specific immune system. But for now, we're going to have a look at the lymphatic system, which does form part of the specific immune system, but we're just going to look at it as an overall system, how it works, what's involved, and how it links in with the immune system. So when we're talking about the lymphatic system, that includes bone marrow, the thymus, the spleen, various lymph nodes throughout the body, and the actual lymph fluid. So basically, lymph fluid bathes all of your body cells, it washes over all of them, and then it drains into lymph nodes. So I've just got a diagram of a person here. This time I drew a stick person because you've seen what happens when I try to draw people. It doesn't go well at all. So you've got loads of lymph nodes around your tonsils. You've got them around sort of your upper arm. There are loads around your intestine. They go into your groin and your upper leg as well. So they're found all over your body. But basically, the lymph fluid washes over your body cells and then it drains into these lymph nodes. And then I've got a close-up of what these lymph nodes will look like. So they've got the first label I've got is an afferent vessel, which just means a vessel going into the lymph node. So fluid drains in, and if you look closely, you can see there's a valve there, a bit like the valves in the heart that you study in year 11. That means that the fluid can only move in one direction. So when the fluid then gets into the main bit of the lymph node, there are clusters of immune cells, B and T cells, okay? So basically, these B and T cells can pick up on any pathogens in the lymph. So if there's an infection somewhere in your body, the lymph washes over it, it picks it up, and then it goes into a lymph node where the B and T cells will pick up on it. And then it will just drain into another lymph node from there through this system. As well as that, antigen-presenting cells that we looked at earlier in the week, like the dendritic cells, they can move through the lymph system too. So if an antigen-presenting cell, like a dendritic cell, has engulfed a pathogen by phagocytosis and then got the antigens on its outer layer, it can move to a lymph node to show those antigens to B and T cells and say, look what I found, what are you going to do about it? So just down the bottom there, I've got some extra information about that, just really what I was talking about there. So yeah, lymph fluid goes over all your body cells and it drains into lymph nodes. Lymph nodes contain B and T cells, which are part of the specific immune system, which we'll look at next lesson. And they screen the lymph fluid for any pathogens that may have been picked up. And then antigen-presenting cells also move to the lymph nodes for B or T cells to process what they have found. So just to finish up, when we're talking about B and T cells, these are the most important cells in the specific immune response. We'll look at them in a lot of detail in upcoming lessons. But just to be aware where their name comes from, both of them are made in bone marrow, and B cells also mature in the bone marrow. So they're made there and then they mature there. And by mature, I mean that's when they become specialized into what they do. So the B is for bone marrow, where they mature. T cells, while they're also made in the bone marrow, they mature in your thymus, an organ around here. So they're called T cells for the thymus, where they mature. So I've just got a brief table to sum that up. B cells are made in bone marrow and mature in bone marrow, and that's where they get their name from. T cells are made in bone marrow and mature in the thymus, which is where they get their name from. And finally, just a point, B and T cells are often, and to be honest, probably more correctly, referred to as B and T lymphocytes. That's one of those things that VCAR don't tend to be too fussy on. You can refer to them as B cells or B lymphocytes, T cells or T lymphocytes. But just be aware that they often do use the most correct term when they ask you a question. So if you see something about B lymphocytes or T lymphocytes, it's B cells and T cells. That's just the most correct way of talking about them. So that is everything for today, and then next time we will look in more detail about how those B and T cells function as part of the specific immune system. Okay, thank you.